hello in the chat and let us know that you're here and let us know who your favorite female artist is. The appropriate answer today is Margie Worthington. And it is 10:01. Donna's here. Oh my goodness.
Donna, where's Donna? Okay, I'm looking at a coffee cup and some books.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Oh, September says in the chat box, she says, looks like you've been painting at the beach.
I have not been to the beach. I've been trying to create the beach in my studio because I can't get there.
I know.
Yeah.
Are you guys ready to get started? Oh, Donna says good morning. So good to see you.
Good morning.
I'm going to give it one more minute because I know we have quite a few people. Oh my goodness. We're up to 14 people. People just keep pouring in.
They're very bored.
No, they love you. All right. Let's get started. So many of you have been to these conversations. Here's a beautiful picture of Margie, and we'll go ahead and get started with our conversation. Oh my goodness, so many people saying good morning. Georgia and Jay are here, Margie.
My sister, my brother-in-law. Hey, y'all.
Awesome. So I have the great honor to get to introduce one of the most beloved artists in our collection today, Margie Worthington. Just yesterday, Margie, someone told me, and I won't say who it is, someone told me that your work, Reclamation, is their very favorite in the exhibition She Persists.
Wow. How nice. How nice.
Margie Worthington grew up in Windsor, a small town in eastern North Carolina. She's a graduate of University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and received an MFA at ECU in Greenville, North Carolina in ceramics. And she moved to Wilmington in 1984 and became the first curator of education at St. John's Museum of Art. She joined the art faculty at UNCW and taught courses in art history, design, painting, and mixed media from 1990 to 2005. She teaches painting in Wilmington, and she works in her home studio where we get to be today. And her work is in collections at the Cameron Art Museum, the Randall Library, and UNCW. So Margie, you're such a multifaceted artist. And I wanted to, I know, I mean, it's amazing reading about you that you studied ceramics and you're a painter and you've done abstracts and now you're doing, you know, more representational work. I wanted to ask you a question. You say you've been painting and drawing your whole life. When did you start as a child? And what are your first memories of when you decided you wanted to be an artist as a child?
Well, that was real early. I mean, I can't remember who gave me my first paint by number set or whatever, but those things with the little jars and you paint in the little shapes. And I can remember doing that for endless hours as a child. And I absolutely loved that you put the shape of this color next to the shape of this color. It was all numbered and everything. You just, you know, followed the directions. But it was fun to me to make something, usually a horse, appear. So, yeah, and I just drew all the time. I still think the center of my creative life is that porch, that house where you saw me standing in the photograph. That's my old family house at Nag's Head. And I have a lot of cousins up there who are artists. And I think in my childhood, the fact that my father's cousin, who was always very old to me, lovely older woman who was a painter. And I can remember going to visit my cousins at her cottage. I'd walk down the beach and I'd hit the bottom step and I would get this wonderful smell, which I now know was linseed oil. And I'd go see Cousin Lou, and she was a painter. And before I went off to play with my cousins, I would always love to go in her studio, which was in her bedroom, and walk all around, and she'd tell me about all the things she was painting. It is still one of my favorite memories, and she saw to it that my parents got me in some private art lessons. When I was probably maybe in the 6th grade or so, I started private
So
painting,
like
oil painting.
11 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like those constants in your life, the ocean and painting, have remained in your life.
They have indeed. They have indeed.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that you've been drawing and painting all your life, but you also worked as a production potter. Can you tell us about that?
I did. I went home sort of as a fluke with my sister-in-law. She lived in Southern Pines, and my brother was in the Navy, and he could not go one Easter weekend. So she took me home with her, and her mother took us around to all the pottery places, which you know are in Moore County in that area. And it made me remember that in my childhood, I had seen people making pots when we took the class trip to Jamestown. And it was one of those things, I saw the man doing it in Jamestown, and I thought to myself, I'm going to do that one day. So it was one of those things, I think we now call it a bucket list or whatever, but it was just one of those things inside of me. And so when we went to all the potteries, I mean, we probably went to 10 different potteries that day with my sister-in-law, and I saw a man making these beautiful pots, and I stood there and I said, I am dying to know how to do that. And he said, well, I'm going to be teaching it. Why don't you come take a class? So instead of going to Nags Head to wait tables, I went to Southern Pines and signed up for a pottery class and came out of there just really a novice, but I knew how to center, I knew how to throw, and I became an apprentice in Chapel Hill to a man who really taught me how to make pots. And I did that several years and really knew that if I were going to make any money or whatever, I needed to teach. And I wanted to teach. So I went back to East Carolina and did my graduate work. And it started in clay, but it didn't stay in clay.
So what did you study at UNC Chapel Hill?
I studied psychology.
Oh, wow.
And I actually was thinking I was going to be some kind of counseling therapist person. And I had applied to some graduate programs when I went tootling off to take that pottery class. I was waiting to hear back from some graduate things. And, you know, I got in a couple of them and I just said, no, thank you. I'm going to be a potter. So much to my father's dismay, I think, but anyway.
So one of those moments that just completely changed your life.
Yeah, it really did. And I loved throwing pots. And I still have dreams in which I'm making pots, but it's a little bit more than my old back after all it's been through can take at this point.
Yeah. So was your MFA was in ceramics, yes?
Yes, and it was interesting. I got there at East Carolina, and I was really, I was an older student. I was a non-traditional student, as they called us back then. And I was making pots in my classes, in my clay classes, and I was the only student making vessels. And everybody else was doing all this weird stuff, and I had no idea how they thought up the weird stuff or what made them do it. And I just kept kind of making the whole pots, the same pots that I knew the whole time for the first month or so. And every time we'd have a critique, the students would sit around and they'd look at my perfect teapot and they wouldn't know what to say while they were talking about all these esoteric things and all these aesthetic things. And I really didn't understand what was going on. But I knew that that was my opportunity to get off that wheel and really find myself as an artist. So I made myself stop making the pots and I began to explore some other things with clay. And it ended up that I was kind of making collages out of colored clay and things. So then when I moved here, I didn't have all the clay equipment. So I just began to just work in paper and found objects, and then it turned into wood and metal and kind of making art out of a little bit of everything.
What an amazing description of that transition. I wanted to read out loud this amazing quote by you about your own work from your website and ask you about it. I think it's so beautiful, and it talks about exactly what you were talking about. You say, although I had been drawing and painting all my life, and had spent several years as a production potter, it was in graduate school that I began to grasp the power of the visual language and its elements of line, shape, texture, color, and the magic of light and dark. I realized that this language of form could be used not only to describe and depict real objects, but it could also function in a poetic way without an object. The elements themselves, such as shape or textures, could evoke a feeling or memory, a sense of place or a moment in time. I was hooked and began my pursuit of visual poetry by working abstractly in mixed media collage, which remained my focus for over 2 decades. I find myself, however, in recent years, returning to my first love, which was painting in oils and in a representational manner. Bringing these interests together, the visual poetry and looseness of working abstractly, of my understanding of working more realistically, remains an elusive yet totally engaging challenge. And I wanted to see if you could talk about that idea of visual poetry and how shapes or textures can evoke a feeling or a memory, a sense of place or a moment in time. In one of my favorite works in our collection, which is Requiem, I look at Requiem and I feel it evokes memory for me. There's something very spiritual about Requiem, and I wondered if you could talk about this work.
Well, you've already said what I most would want a viewer to say, so thank you. I love that you see that. I really became fascinated with collage and with the layering process. I have always, ever since childhood, I have been interested in history and family history. And as a child, as a little child, I grew up with very old people around, my grandfather, my great aunt, my nurse. And I was always exposed to these pictures from the 1890s, you know, from the beginnings of my aunt's life and her 9 brothers. And there were just wonderful pictures and wonderful stories. And I loved my visits with my Richmond family, and I would know those people, the ones that were living, and I would look at their childhoods and everything. So I loved all that. I mean, I would love looking at your family pictures. I'm just kind of a nut about all that stuff. So I have those scrapbooks, and I began to Xerox them. Some of my favorite photographs from childhood. And if you look right, you can't see me pointing, but in the middle of the right-hand side, there's a woman sitting in a window. And she's in long skirts. I mean, that year is probably around the turn of the century, around 1900 for that photograph. And my aunt told me how this woman would come to visit her family. And I don't know if she was a cousin or whatever, but I love the picture of the lady sitting in the window. So I made a copy of that. In the middle, next to the blue thing with the hole in it, there is a letter. And that letter I found in a desk that was my mother's and that I have used all my life. And I never knew until I was probably in college that it had a little section that would pull out. And in there were these letters from like my great aunts to my father's mother and all kinds of family gossip and so forth in there. But that wasn't the point. The point was to take that letter, to take that photograph, and I began to dye them, and I began to draw on top of them. And I might take a Xerox of the letter and crumple it up, put it in a vat of acrylic paint, a pot of paint, and then pull it out and dry it on plastic that already had paint on it. And so it would pick up all kinds of residue of color. Every step that I did for me added another layer to what had started out as a Xerox of an old photograph or a letter, which by itself is pretty boring. So I liked the process of doing that. And then I began to have piles and piles of this stuff. And then I began to put them together and try to have them relate to each other. I like to have areas where it was bright color and then areas where it's very subdued. And it's all about bringing all these shapes, all these colors into a kind of balance, into a kind of equilibrium so that they don't feel like they're going to fly off the surface. So if you look, you see there's straight edges, There are loose edges. There are things that look like where paint has spilled. There are places where I've kept in the lines very carefully. There are things that look like old wallpaper, weathered and worn. So it's just, there are images that are barely there and they sort of disappear into the background. And by this time, I had sort of claimed my love of building things and really let myself kind of begin to do that with tools. And it just felt like it needed something on top. And so I added that part after the painting part was pretty much done. And that kind of brought everything into the quiet stillness that I wanted to bring all that chaos into, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely makes sense. One of the phrases that I love so much that you use is the term visual poetry. Can you tell me what that means for you and in your work? I see so much visual poetry in this piece. And I'd love to hear you describe that.
Well, I think that, I think we are creatures of many languages. I think we have our words and now we have all this technology stuff. But there's the language of music and there's the language of mathematics and there's body language. There are other ways that we communicate. And I think one of our first languages is what we feel from what we see. And when you think about your childhood and even your babyhood and how it was the light coming in a window that told you what was about to happen. I mean, it was the feeling of light and the rhythm of the days and the nights. And so I think that poetry, for me, the way the poet can just take a fragment of our experience and put it with another fragment of memory or whatever, and evoke a whole host of feelings and memories, as compared to the way, say, a journalist or a newspaper article might talk about a certain event and they tell you who, what, when, where, they give you all the details. But the poet talking about that is going to just take fragments and pieces and connect them to other things. So I guess for me, when a work of art can suggest instead of tell, it's kind of operating in a realm of poetry. It's like what Robert Henry, the great painter, American painter and teacher in the early 1900s, he was teaching people like Edward Hopper. And he said low art, meaning not very good painting, to him said, there is the night. And I'm paraphrasing very loosely here. High art says, there is the feel of the night. So when you think about Edward Hopper's paintings, those of you that know Nighthawks, the people sitting in the cafe at night, and it's the feeling. So for me, I'm not so much going for night or day, or I'm just going for the capacity of line, shape, texture, color, light, dark, to evoke a feeling in the viewer. And for a lot of people, if they were to see something like my work, they would first say, well, what is that supposed to be? And I mean, you get real used to that when you work like I did for a long time. And it's not about, it's supposed to be communicating something to you in words. It's just to touch you wherever it might or might not touch you in your memory.
Do you read poetry?
I do. I should read more, but I read it and I listen to it, on podcasts and things.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I love this work, and I also love the other work by Margie in our collection. I wish we weren't looking at this on PowerPoint. You guys all have to come see She Persists so you can see these both in person, but this is Reclamation. And Margie, I was wondering if you could tell us about this work.
That one is smaller. That one, it was in a series I did after I sort of left behind the wood. I began to have some back issues, and I really couldn't handle all the saws and the moving and the working on the floor. So things got smaller and they got to be different papers. And here again, my love of just beginning with little things like something like that part with the lines at the bottom. That would, maybe I spent a whole day with a little needle tool that you would give a dog medicine with, and I discovered you could squeeze paint out of it and make wonderful lines. So I'd make lines, I'd make patterns, and then I'd cut them up, and I'd have a stash of that, and then I'd have fabric like you see at the top, that blue and white square, those squares there. For me, a pattern like that brought a stillness and a rest, a place for the eye to sort of stop and pause and really rest in the middle of all that chaos. So that is all paper. You can see my love of that needle. There are a lot of lines in there that I kind of raised up, but yeah, I did a lot of works on paper, and it was really, I got to the point where I just thought, I'm kind of tired of doing this. I'm like really tired of doing this. And I began to wonder if I even knew how to draw anymore. I had worked abstractly, and I love abstract work, and I am sure I will make more collages. But I did get to a point where, for me, I thought, I think I need to go back and see if I can remember how to draw. And I
You're a miraculous interviewee.
I talk too much.
No, this is a great transition, because what I wanted to transition to was talking about your transition, right, to working representationally again. And I know, can everyone see Margie now that I stopped the screen share? She's in her studio and has some work behind her. Margie, can you tell us what you're working on now?
Well, when I got to that point, I made myself do something I had asked students to do a number of times. I thought it'd be a good exercise for me, and it was to take one object and paint, draw, sculpt, do whatever you needed to do, but deal with that object 100 times. So I picked a pear, and of course it took many pears in time, and I painted it in acrylic and watercolor and chalk and charcoal, and I did it with ink, and I did it with sticks, and I got so tired of that pear. I got to maybe about number 33, and I thought, you know, the one thing you haven't done here is paint it on canvas in oil. And I thought, oil, oh my God, I hadn't done oil in 40 whatever years, but I still had some. And so, excuse me, I made myself get my oil paint out, and that's kind of how it started. There was that linseed oil smell that I had loved from childhood. There were all those wonderful, colors that you could smear, and it didn't dry like acrylic did so quickly. And anyway, so I started working in oil. And at this point, we've been, all of us have been confined mostly to home and for months. And so I thought, okay, I can't get to my beloved Nag's Head, and going to the ocean at Wrightsville Beach is very crowded, and parking is a problem. So I thought, I'm going to paint something that has scared me all my life. And I find that so often that's what you need to do as an artist. If there's something that's been nagging at you that you've been too chicken to do, go ahead and do it. So I've spent the last several months working on the ocean, and I've got a couple back here. I don't know if you can see, working with waves breaking, and of course I love to paint boats, and then this bigger one, maybe you can see this better than any of them. It's very challenging, and it occurred to me the other day, I thought, I don't want to paint the ocean so much the way it looks. I want to do that thing Robert Henry talked about. I want to get the feel of the ocean. And since it is something that does not stay still, I'm working with photographs and trying to make a still thing seem like a smoothie.
And you're doing it. You're doing it. It's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. I'm having fun.
I can tell. I can remember trying to capture the ocean. I was into photography for a while, and how hard it was to capture that motion. But you're able to do that on the canvas, and it's amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about your process. I think people are always curious about artistic process. I'd love to know, do you paint every day? Do you go to the studio in the morning? Are you superstitious about things? Do you always have coffee in the studio, or what's your, what's your, what
Mine at this point is kind of get in there when you can, and you know, I can get lost in here, and I find that if I don't get in here for a few days, I'm aware of it in my head. I mean, there's just a level of thinking and a way of working on multiple things at one time that happens in the studio, and it really helps me cope with all the isolation we've all had, and you know, the separation, and it's been a good place, been a good thing for me to do.
yeah,
So, you know, but not too much of a routine here.
yeah. I wanted to ask you, because you have works in She Persists. She Persists is an exhibition of it's 100 works from our collection of women artists in celebration of the centennial of the 19th passage of the 19th Amendment. And I'm curious about how being a woman has impacted your life as an artist and in academia. What your experience has been as a woman artist, and how that has impacted you either in subject matter, theme, or just your experiences.
Well, that's a big question, and I can remember, I know other day you told me you might ask me the artists that had impacted and influenced me, and to be perfectly honest, I was in graduate school, and I was in art history classes, and I had a teacher who, Baruta Erdman, a Latvian woman who just was a grand, wonderful teacher, and every single course she taught, she would bring in all these women. And I was there in the late 70s, early 80s, and I'd never heard, they weren't in the book, I'd never heard of them. And of course, we were using a textbook that had no women in it. You know, talked about thousands and thousands of years of art history, and thousands and thousands of artists in the index in the back, and not a single one of them was female. And I'm, of course, talking about Toni Jansen's book. And then I took a course about women in art because I just felt like I needed to. And Baruta introduced us to all these women. She had done all this work, and it was absolutely fascinating to be in school at the moment when the articles were coming out by very reputable, hardworking, young women, art critics and historians, who were saying, wait a minute, why have there been no great women artists? And I began to, you know, look at what they were saying, and their whole point was what it has meant to be great has been a system that was truly rigged against women, because to be great, let's say in the Renaissance or before, or for many years after, you did history painting, and you painted the philosophers, and you painted the great events, and women at that point, they didn't even know how to read, so they didn't get that education. They weren't allowed to study from the nude. This all began to really make sense to me, that if you were going to be a famous portrait painter, you had to study from the nude model. And even in the, you know, early 1900s, women were not allowed in the room with a nude male. They would bring a cow in and let the woman draw from the cow, but they wouldn't let them draw. So anyway, I realized that for me, it was those art historians who were really opening doors for people like me, who began to think, well, wait a minute, I don't just have to paint on canvas. And I wasn't brought up to know how to work power tools, but I bet I can do it if I need to build something. You know, they gave me some permissions, and I think realizing that thing about great, not that I ever wanted to be great or thought I would be great, but just to realize, wait a minute, this system where there are no women talked about. In fact, the art historian asked Toni Jansen when would he ever consider putting a woman in the history of art when he revised it. And he said, whenever a woman does something great enough. Well, my good fortune was to be teaching, I happened to be teaching a class on women in art. It became a real focus for me. at UNCW. It was the first time it had been offered. And guess who my chairman was at the time? My chairman was Tony Jansen, the son of Anthony Jansen, whose job it was at that point to revise the book and bring it out again. Tony was very committed to putting women in the book. I mean, it really kind of gives me goosebumps to even talk about it now. The step he took and included many women. And so I asked him to come and talk to my women in art class, which was a real special thing to have Tony Jansen come in and explain why he had gone against everything his father had said. And I think the first time he may have included, I don't know, a couple of dozen women in his book. So I was very moved by what was going on at that time with women artists standing up and saying, wait a minute, we're not going to be evaluated by those old standards. We need a whole new way of thinking about this, and that is more inclusive and is more open to the experience of being a woman and making art about that.
Thank you. That was an amazing answer. And I wanted to say too, I think many of the people who are here today were also here when we talked to Audrey Flack. She gave a wonderful conversation, and she told us then that she was actually the first woman that Tony put into his father's book. And Mary Cassatt is also in that book. Yeah. So we are proud at the Cameron Art Museum to own works by both Audrey Flack and Mary Cassatt. And they're both in She Persists. So if you haven't seen that show, please go see it. Margie, I wanted to ask you, what inspires you right now? Who or what inspires you?
I hope you can see that the world of nature is what I'm looking to right now. And it's interesting in this time of so much, we feel like so many things are changing and we don't know how they're going to change or how they're going to be. I'm trying to bring stillness to the most changeable thing I know, which is the ocean. It doesn't stay still anytime at all. And so that's touching me on many levels. Also looking at light and dark. I've got some things I've been working on in the woods from some photographs up in the Nag's Head woods, and that whole magic of light and dark that I talked about earlier. Now for me is light and dark clothing the form and finding, how to make it feel dramatic, how to make it with the feel. So,
Margie, thank you so much. I'd love to open up the conversation to everyone who's here. If they'd like to ask Margie a question, you can type it into the chat box. Or if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and show us your video so we can see you, you can ask Margie a question too. Margie, you have 18 people here.
Oh, how wonderful. I see some of them. Hey, y'all.
If you guys know, you can put it on gallery view if you want to see everybody's faces, or speaker view if you just want to see the person who's speaking.
We asked a question now.
Yes, right. Go for it.
So, Margie, you never did say who was your favorite woman artist in all that.
Well, and that's a good question. I don't really, I'm sure Cassatt would be at the top of the list. She was so brave to leave her family and to be a woman and take off for Europe. I greatly admire her and those other women who were working at that time. I think a lot of her, and I think the Cameron is such a treasure to have so much work by her right over there where we can go see it. So I think in the time I was making the built things, I was certainly looking at a lot of Louise Nevelson with, her very sculptural, painted, just, I love the fact that she did all that wood stuff. Of course, she had a lot of assistants, but, like helpers, people sawing and doing things. I was figuring it out myself, but it was fun. It was fun.
Margie, you have a question from Ned. He says hi first. And
Ned.
He wants to know what inspires your beautiful urban landscapes.
My urban landscapes. Well, I haven't done that many of them, but he's got one of my favorites. I do remember that. Thank you, Ned. I ride down there usually on Sunday mornings. I get my coffee and I ride down there when there are no cars, downtown Wilmington, and it's just the light, the way the light hits those old buildings and the shadows. I'm looking for that drama and that light and dark, and that pink building that he has is a different color in every time of day and in the seasons. So it's still all about color and light for me.
All right, Ned has
And
another question.
the bridges, oh Ned, I was in a paint out and I was so panicked because I haven't done that much work outdoors. I really was kind of lost, but I was one of those hard things I was trying to make myself do as an artist. And I had a little tiny canvas and I wrote all around and I couldn't find anything to paint, which usually just means you're terrified. And so I saw that bridge and I saw the light hitting the bridge. I'm talking about the big bridge, the Cape Fear Bridge. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can put that entire bridge on this little canvas. Out here by myself, it doesn't work, nobody ever has to know. And I was pleased with my little painting of that bridge. It was fun. I'd like to paint it bigger.
Do it. Are there any more questions? Any more questions for Margie?
September is saying something.
Oh,
Talking about the
your right
seam over my right shoulder. Okay, September. I'll move the wave. Let's see. You're talking about that landscape. That is in the Nags Head Woods, a place that has been very special in my family for a long time. It's back on the Sound side, the western side of that island, and it's just a sand path that goes through, and there are these wonderful natural ponds there. They call them the fresh ponds. They're now covered with green algae, but in my great-grandfather's day, who built the house we live in, he would go back there and fish and fill up big barrels of fish, pack them with salt, and then ship them, carry them by buggy and horse and boat back for the winter to Bertie County. So yeah, those ponds and that woods, that's a place I love to go photograph and paint. This is so fun to see all of y'all. And while we have a little pause here, I just want to say to all my pals at the Cameron, what an incredible job you all are doing in the middle of this pandemic craziness. You are putting so many different options out there for, everybody can find something of interest, whether it's the music or the writing or the meditating or the painting or the whatever. And I really applaud what you're doing. I'm so excited about the Colored Troops project going on. I hope that won't get stalled or off track. But I'm just really, really proud of the work you're doing, and I thank you for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any more questions for Margie? Oh. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Please come see Margie's work in person, and she persists. Go sit in front of Requiem. It'll make you feel better. It's just, I love it so much. I do. And Ned says it's a great exhibition. It absolutely is. Bob did an incredible job.
Bob
It's an
always
incredible
does
installation.
an incredible job.
And it's so wonderful. He does. And Bob is very fond of Margie's work. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and please come back and see us on Zoom. We'll be talking with Beverly McIver on Wednesday, September 23rd at 6 o'clock. I'd love to see you there. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks, everybody. Great to see all of you.
Thank you, Margie.
Thank you.
Thank you.